My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a nurse from Portland. We were driving, just a normal family road trip. The kids were in the back, the sun was shining, and we were on our way to a family reunion in Canada. My husband, Mark, who is the calmest person I know, suddenly turned to me. His face was white, completely drained of color. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He leaned over, his voice so low it was barely a breath, and he whispered, "Turn the car around. Now." I almost laughed. It was so out of character, so strange, that my first thought was that he was playing some kind of weird joke. But then I saw his eyes. The terror in his eyes stopped my heart. There was no joke there. It was pure, unfiltered fear. In that split second, I had a choice. Argue with him, ask him what was wrong, or just trust him. I decided to trust him, and it saved us. It didn't just save us from a terrible fate. It changed how I saw my parents forever. That whisper cracked my world open and showed me the ugly truth that had been hiding underneath for years. So, from wherever you're watching, tell me in the comments, have you ever trusted someone in a split second, only to realize it revealed the darkest truth? Before we diving in like this video, subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comment where in the world are you watching from. The minivan smelled like a well-lived life, a carefully contained capsule of our family's chaos. The dominant scent was the slightly burnt aroma of the dark roast coffee in my travel mug, a brew Mark had lovingly made for me at 5 in the morning. Underneath that was the sugary, artificial grape smell from the fruit snacks Ben had already managed to smear on his car seat, and the faint, salty ghost of the goldfish crackers Maya had spilled between the seats 2 days ago. It wasn't an unpleasant smell. It was the smell of us. It was the smell of home, even when home was a metal box hurtling down a highway at 70 miles per hour. I had one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, the other wrapped around the comforting warmth of the mug. The car was a 2018 Honda Odyssey, a practical, unglamorous vessel we'd bought after Ben was born. It was perpetually covered in a thin film of dust and fingerprints, a testament to its primary function as a kid transporter. Beside me, Mark was doing what he always did on long drives, co-piloting with a quiet intensity. While the dashboard GPS chirped out directions with its calm, robotic voice, he had his own map app open on his phone, tracing our blue dot as it moved along the thick red line of the interstate. He liked to see the full picture, to know the names of the towns we were passing, to see the web of smaller roads that branched off the main artery. He was an accountant by trade, a man who found comfort in numbers and order, and that methodical nature extended to everything he did. It was a quality that could have been rigid or controlling in another person, but in Mark, it was a source of profound stability. He was my anchor in the often turbulent sea of raising 3 children and working a demanding job. While my days as a nurse were a whirlwind of split-second decisions, beeping monitors, and human fragility, my life with Mark was a steady, predictable rhythm. I knew he would always check that the doors were locked at night, that the bills were paid on time, and that there was always a backup bottle of ketchup in the pantry. He made our world feel safe. In the back, the fragile truce that usually marked the beginning of a road trip was beginning to crumble. Leo, our eldest at 10, was deep into his own world. His headphones, a sleek black pair he'd saved up for all summer, were clamped firmly over his ears, and his eyes were glued to the screen of his tablet, where some animated superhero was battling a giant robot. He was at that age where the family unit was becoming a slight embarrassment, a necessary but uncool part of his existence. 7-year-old Maya, our thoughtful artist, was hunched over her coloring book, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her world was one of clean lines and bright colors, and she was meticulously shading in the scales of a dragon, making sure to stay perfectly within the black-bordered spaces. And then there was Ben. At 4, Ben's primary mission in life was to explore the world through a combination of touch, taste, and entropy. He had finished deconstructing his granola bar and had now moved on to kicking the back of my seat with a soft, rhythmic thud that was slowly starting to fray my nerves. "Mom?" Maya's voice was laced with the long-suffering sigh of a middle child. "Ben is kicking your seat. Ben, sweetheart, can you please stop kicking Mommy's seat?" I said, my voice adopting the practiced, gentle but firm tone of a seasoned parent. The kicking stopped for a moment, then was replaced by a high-pitched whine. "I'm bored. And Leo won't let me watch? It's my tablet time, Ben." Leo's voice was muffled by his headphones, but the annoyance was clear. "You had your turn." "But I want to watch the robot movie," Ben wailed, his voice climbing in volume. Before I could intervene, Mark turned in his seat. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice calm and even. "How about we play a game?" "I spy, just me and you." Ben's wail immediately subsided, his attention captured. "Okay." I spy with my little eye. Something blue. Mark scanned the car's interior. Is it Leo's t-shirt? No, Ben giggled. Is it the sky? No, he squealed with delight. This was Mark's magic. He could diffuse a tantrum with a simple game, his endless patience a perfect counterbalance to my sometimes limited supply. I glanced over at him, a small smile playing on my lips. He caught my eye and winked, a silent acknowledgement of our teamwork. In that small, ordinary moment, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. This was my life. The messy, noisy, complicated, beautiful life we had built together. The destination, of course, was the source of my only real ambivalence. The Monroe family reunion. It was my father's family, but my mother was always the one who championed it, who insisted we attend. For my mom, appearances were everything. She curated our family's image like a prize-winning garden, and these reunions were her chance to put it on display. She needed everyone to see her successful daughters, her handsome son-in-law, her beautiful grandchildren. It was a performance, and we were all assigned our roles. My sister, Chloe, who was 2 years older, had always been the star of the show. She was a corporate lawyer, married to a surgeon, and lived in a sprawling house in a gated community in California. Her life was a series of impressive accomplishments that my mother would recite to anyone who would listen. I was the supporting actress, the nurse, the one who had stayed in Oregon, who had married her reliable college boyfriend, who lived a quiet, suburban life. My mother loved me. I knew she did. But it was a different kind of love than the one she had for Chloe. Chloe's life was a reflection of my mother's ambitions. My life was just my life. I was the responsible one, the practical one, the one who had never caused them a moment of worry, which, I was beginning to realize, also meant I was the one they never worried about. We made one stop, about an hour out from the border, at a bustling gas station and travel center. The air outside was cool and crisp, a welcome break from the recycled air of the minivan. While Mark filled the tank, I herded the kids inside. The store was a chaotic symphony of bright fluorescent lights, beeping scanners, and the smell of hot dogs on a roller grill. Ben immediately made a run for a giant display of candy, while Maya carefully inspected the rack of postcards. Leo, feigning disinterest, trailed behind me, but I saw his eyes linger on the energy drinks in the cooler. "No way," I said, before he could even ask. He sighed dramatically. "It was just a thought. We bought a bag of pretzels, 3 bottles of water, and a coffee for me that was somehow both scalding hot and completely tasteless. It was a scene of utter domestic banality. A mother and her 3 children buying snacks at a roadside stop. We were so normal it was almost a cliché. Standing at the counter, waiting to pay, I felt a sudden sharp pang of loneliness. I wished, not for the first time, that I had a better relationship with my sister, that I could call her and complain good-naturedly about the long drive, that we could laugh about the quirks of our extended family. But our relationship was one of polite distance, a carefully maintained surface with nothing substantial underneath. Chloe was my mother's confidant. I was just her other daughter. Back in the car, with the journey almost over, a sense of tired peace settled over us. Ben had fallen asleep, his head lolling to one side, his mouth slightly open. Maya was quietly reading a book she had bought, and Leo was back in his digital world. The final stretch of highway unfolded before us, a straight, predictable ribbon of asphalt. The signs for the Canadian border began to appear with increasing frequency, their crisp green and white marking the final miles. Peace Arch State Park, last U.S. exit, U.S. Customs and Border Protection. I took a final sip of my terrible coffee and settled in, anticipating the familiar routine of the border crossing. The slow crawl of cars, the questions from the officer, the handing over of passports. It was the last hurdle before we could get to the resort and unpack. I imagined the reunion, my mother's tight hug, my father's quiet pat on the back. I pictured my aunts and uncles, their faces softened by age, ready to tell the same stories they told every 5 years. It would be boring. It would be predictable. And in a way, I was looking forward to that predictability. I glanced over at Mark. He had put his phone away. He was sitting perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees. He was staring out the windshield, his focus so intense he seemed to be trying to see through the cars in front of us. "Almost there," I said, my voice light. "Think Uncle Robert will bring out his terrible magic tricks again this year?" Mark didn't smile. He didn't even seem to hear me. He just kept staring, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Everything okay?" I asked, a tiny flicker of unease starting in my chest. He didn't respond for a long moment. He just sat there, a statue carved from granite. I followed his gaze, trying to see what had captured his attention. All I saw was the line of cars ahead, the sprawling complex of the border station, the flags of the United States and Canada flapping gently in the breeze. Everything looked normal. "Mark," I said again, my voice a little louder this time. He turned his head to look at me, and the casual, peaceful atmosphere in the car evaporated like mist in a hot sun. The color had drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask. His eyes, my husband's kind, steady eyes, were wide with an emotion I had never seen in them before. It was a raw, visceral terror that seemed to come from the deepest part of him. My medical training kicked in, my mind cycling through a differential diagnosis. "Stroke? Aneurysm? Myocardial infarction? Are you feeling sick?" I asked, my voice sharp with a sudden professional alarm. "Mark, talk to me. Does your chest hurt?" He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He swallowed, a dry, difficult sound. He leaned across the console, his body so tense it vibrated with a low-frequency hum of pure adrenaline. And then he spoke, his voice a ragged, urgent whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. It was a command, a plea, and a warning all in one. "Turn the car around, now." And just like that, normal was over. The road trip, the reunion, the life I thought I was living, it all came to a screeching halt on a strip of asphalt just a few miles from a border I suddenly knew we could not cross. The two words hung in the air, sharp and jagged, slicing through the comfortable drone of the engine and the soft sounds of my sleeping child. "Turn around." My mind, conditioned by years of logic and routine, refused to accept them. It was like a computer encountering a line of code it couldn't execute. Turn around? It made no sense. We were less than 5 minutes from our destination. We had driven for almost 4 hours. The resort was booked. My parents were expecting us. The kids were anticipating a lake and cousins. Turning around was not an option on the flowchart of my well-planned day. "What are you talking about?" I whispered back, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Why? Did you forget something?" Even as I said it, I knew it was a stupid question. Mark, my husband who packed our passports in a specific, zippered pocket of his carry-on a week before any trip, would not have forgotten something so crucial. "Emily, please," he breathed, his eyes not leaving mine. The desperation in his voice was a physical thing, a pressure building in the small space between us. "There's no time to explain. Just do it. Get in the right lane. Take the next exit." The sign he was referring to was coming up fast. "Exit 275, last U.S. exit." The words seemed to mock me, a finality that sent a fresh wave of panic through my chest. Behind us, cars were beginning to stack up, funneling into the designated lanes for the border crossing. To our left was the nexus lane for trusted travelers. To our right was the general traffic lane, which we were in. And beyond that, the exit ramp, a path leading away from this place of sudden, inexplicable dread. I had a window of about 10 seconds to make a decision. My entire being was at war with itself. The rational part of me, the nurse who followed protocols and trusted evidence, wanted to pull over, to demand an explanation, to understand the data before acting. But the other part of me, the wife who had known this man for 15 years, the woman who had built a life on the foundation of his steadfastness and integrity, saw the sheer, unadulterated terror in his eyes and knew it was real. Mark did not panic. He did not have anxiety attacks. He did not engage in theatrics. If he was this scared, then there was something to be scared of. Trust. It all came down to that. Did I trust my own need for logic, or did I trust him? With a strangled sob of frustration and fear, I chose him. I jerked the steering wheel to the right. The minivan, heavy with luggage and life, lurched into the next lane. A horn blared behind me, a long, angry sound from a pickup truck driver I had just cut off. I ignored it, my focus narrowed to that single green sign. I flicked on my turn signal, the rhythmic click, 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 a frantic counterpoint to the hammering of my own heart. I guided the car onto the exit ramp, the tires whining as we banked onto the curving road. We drove up the overpass, and in my rearview mirror, I could see the border station shrinking behind us. The place we were supposed to be, now a symbol of a danger I couldn't comprehend. The moment we were back on the I-5, heading south, away from the border, a small measure of the tension in the car dissipated. Mark let out a long, shuddering breath, as if he'd been holding it for miles. He slumped back in his seat, the rigid posture he'd held for the last few minutes collapsing. He ran a shaky hand over his face. The silence that followed this abrupt, chaotic maneuver was deafening. Even Ben, who had been woken up by the sudden swerve, was quiet, his thumb finding its way into his mouth. From the very back, Leo's voice, sharp with the indignation of a preteen whose world has been arbitrarily disrupted, cut through the quiet. What was that? Mom, you almost got us hit. Where are we going? Yeah, Mommy, Maya chimed in, her voice small and worried. I thought we were seeing Grandma and Grandpa. The innocent question felt like a punch to the gut. Grandma and Grandpa. My parents. A new, terrible thought began to form in the back of my mind. Was this about them? Was Mark afraid of seeing them for some reason? We, had to turn back, sweetie, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. The lie I had prepared earlier felt wholly inadequate now. We forgot. We forgot a very important present for the reunion. We have to go back and get it. What present? Leo challenged, his skepticism broadcasting loudly from the back seat. You said we had everything packed. It's a grown-up thing, Leo, Mark interjected, his voice still tight and hoarse. He turned to face the back, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. It's a surprise. We don't want to ruin it. We'll just be a little late, that's all. His attempt to sound normal was so unconvincing that it only heightened the tension. The kids fell silent again, but it was a watchful, uneasy silence. They knew something was wrong. Children always do. They have a sixth sense for the emotional undercurrents that adults try so desperately to hide. I drove on, my mind a chaotic storm of questions. Mark, I said, my voice barely a whisper, pitched so low that the kids couldn't possibly hear. You have to tell me what's happening. I'm driving blind here. Am I supposed to go all the way home? What's the plan? He shook his head, his eyes scanning the road, the exits, the other cars. He still looked like a hunted animal. No, not home, just drive south for a bit. We need to stop. We need to find a place where we can talk. Somewhere quiet. Are we in danger? I asked, the question tasting like ash in my mouth. Is someone after us? He hesitated, and that small pause terrified me more than a direct yes would have. I don't know, he said finally, his voice ragged. I really, really hope not. Every mile we put between ourselves and the border felt like a step further into a nightmare. The familiar landscape of the Pacific Northwest, the tall pines and the distant hazy mountains, now seemed alien and menacing. Every car that lingered too long in my rearview mirror became a potential threat. Every exit sign felt like a choice that could lead to safety or disaster. The minivan, our safe family cocoon, now felt like a fragile, exposed shell. I was operating on pure adrenaline and a blind faith in my husband that was being tested with every passing mile. The lie I had told the children, the lie about the forgotten present, echoed in my head. It was a flimsy shield against a reality that felt sharp and dangerous. We had forgotten something, that much was true. We had forgotten to be afraid. We had driven into this day with the naive assumption that it would be like any other, that the world was a safe and predictable place. But the terror on my husband's face had shattered that illusion. We were no longer on a road trip. We were on the run, and I had no idea what we were running from. Finally, after about 15 minutes of this agonizing, silent driving, Mark pointed to a small, unassuming sign for a state park. There, he said. Pull in there. Find a deserted parking lot. I took the exit, my hands slick with sweat. The road became narrower, winding through a dense forest. The air grew cooler, the sunlight filtering down in dappled patches through the thick canopy of trees. It should have been peaceful, but it felt ominous. We passed the main picnic area, which was dotted with a few families, and continued on toward a sign that read, Overflow Parking. The lot was empty, a wide, gravel-covered space surrounded by towering fir trees. It felt completely isolated from the rest of the world. Here is good, Mark said, his voice low. I pulled the car into a space at the far end of the lot, as far from the road as possible, and put it in park. I turned off the engine. The sudden profound silence was broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the distant cawing of a crow. I turned to my husband, my body thrumming with a mixture of fear and anger. Okay, I said, my voice shaking with the effort of keeping it steady. We're here. We're alone. Now you are going to tell me exactly what the hell is going on. Right now, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared out the front windshield at the silent, watching trees. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever he was about to say was going to change our lives forever. Mark didn't speak right away. He just sat there, his hands clenched into tight fists on his lap, his jaw working silently. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind you take before diving into icy water. The kids were silent in the back, their usual energy replaced by a tense, watchful stillness. They knew this was a serious moment. The playful facade we had tried to maintain had crumbled, and they were left with the raw, unspoken fear that had taken over our car. Stay here, kids, he said, his voice raspy. He didn't look at them as he spoke, his gaze still fixed on the wall of trees in front of us. Your mom and I just need to talk for a minute. Don't get out of the car. He opened his door, and the sound of it unlatching was like a gunshot in the profound quiet of the deserted parking lot. I watched him walk to the rear of the minivan, his movements stiff and unnatural. He stood by the trunk, his shoulders slumped, looking down at the ground as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him. He motioned for me to join him, a small, tired gesture. My heart was a wild bird trapped in my ribcage, beating its wings against my bones. I got out of the car, my legs feeling unsteady, as if the ground itself had become unstable. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and pine needles. It was a clean, natural smell that was completely at odds with the toxic anxiety coiling in my gut. I walked to the back of the van, 100 terrible scenarios playing out in my mind. Was he sick? Was he in debt? Was he having an affair? Was his quiet, predictable life a complete lie? "Mark, you are scaring me to death," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Please, just tell me. Whatever it is, we can face it together. Just tell me." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and a deep, soul-crushing sadness. "It's not me, Em," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I wish it were." He reached down and pressed the button to open the trunk. The hydraulic lift hissed, and the rear door rose slowly, revealing our neatly arranged luggage. Our 4 suitcases, the cooler filled with juice boxes and string cheese, the kids' brightly colored backpacks. Everything looked so normal, so innocent. And sitting right on top, impossible to miss, was the bright red duffel bag. My mother's voice echoed in my head from the night before, cheerful and benign. "It's for Aunt Carol. Just some old photo albums and some vitamins she can't get in Canada. You don't mind taking it, do you? It'll save us on postage." Mark stared at that bag as if it were a live explosive. "What did you see at the border?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "What made you do this?" "It was the checkpoint before the main booths," he began, his voice low and flat. "They had a secondary screening area set up. It looked random, but it wasn't. They were targeting certain types of vehicles, minivans, SUVs, family cars." He paused, swallowing hard. "They had a dog out, a beagle. It was working the line of cars ahead of us. And I saw it, Em. It went to a van, almost identical to ours, and it started going crazy, scratching at the door, barking. The officers pulled the family out of the car immediately. A mom, a dad, 2 little kids, a drug dog. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. My mind struggled to make the connection. A drug dog? What does that have to do with us? We don't have... "Mark, that's crazy. Is it?" he asked, his voice laced with a bitterness I'd never heard from him before. He reached into the trunk and lifted the red duffel bag. It seemed heavier than it should, denser. He placed it on the rough gravel of the parking lot. "Your parents, when they dropped this off last night, how were they acting?" I thought back. They had been almost giddy. My mom was fluttering around, fussing over the kids, pressing a tin of cookies into my hands. My dad, who was usually quiet and reserved, had been unusually talkative, making bad jokes and clapping Mark on the shoulder. I had thought they were just excited about the reunion, happy to see us. Now, their behavior seemed manic, unnatural. They were cheerful, I said slowly, a cold dread beginning to seep into my bones. "They were nervous," Mark corrected me, his voice grim, "and they couldn't get out of our house fast enough." He knelt on the ground, his knees crunching on the gravel, and pulled the zipper on the duffel bag. The sound was harsh, violent in the stillness of the forest. He opened the flap. On top, just as expected, were 2 thick, leather-bound photo albums and a neatly folded t-shirt. He lifted them out and placed them carefully on the ground beside the bag. Beneath them, the bag was filled with a jumble of old clothes. A pair of faded jeans, a couple of thick wool sweaters, a flannel shirt. It looked like a collection of donations for goodwill. Mark plunged his hand deep into the center of the pile of clothes, his fingers searching. I held my breath, my entire body rigid with anticipation. His fingers closed around something. He pulled his hand out, and my world stopped. It was a package, about the size of a small brick, wrapped in layers of clear plastic and sealed with thick black tape. Inside the plastic, a dense white powder was visible. It wasn't vitamins. It wasn't anything you could buy in a store. It was illegal. It was dangerous. And it was in our car. A strangled sound escaped my throat, a gasp that was half a sob. Mark's face was a mask of grim confirmation. This was what he had suspected. This was the source of his terror. He reached back into the bag. His hand came out with another packet, and another. He laid them out in a neat row on the gravel, beside the innocent photo albums. 1, 2, 3. He kept pulling them out until there were 12 of them. 12 bricks of compressed white powder, each one a ticket to a life sentence. Each one a betrayal so profound it defied comprehension. I stumbled backwards, my hand flying to my mouth. My legs gave out, and I sank to my knees on the unforgiving ground, the sharp edges of the stones digging into my skin. I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel anything but a roaring in my ears and an icy coldness spreading through my veins. The world seemed to shrink until it was just those 12 packets, lying starkly on the ground between my husband and me. My parents had done this. My mother, who had taught me how to bake. My father, who had walked me down the aisle. They had knowingly, deliberately, placed a fortune in illegal drugs into a bag, and then handed it to their daughter to smuggle across an international border. And my children. My God, my children. Leo, Maya, and Ben. They were sitting in the car, less than 20 feet away, strapped into their car seats. They had been sleeping, playing, eating snacks, completely oblivious to the fact that they were being used as human shields. Their innocent, smiling faces, the very image of a happy, all-American family, were meant to be our camouflage. We weren't a family on vacation. We were a disguise. The full weight of what would have happened if Mark hadn't seen that dog, if I hadn't trusted his desperate plea, crashed down on me. The flashing lights, the stern-faced officers, the dog scratching at our car door, being pulled out onto the pavement, handcuffed in front of our screaming children, our kids being taken away by Child Protective Services, the interrogation rooms, the prison cells. Our lives, our future, our family, all of it would have been incinerated in that single moment. And my parents, what would they have done? I knew with a sickening certainty. They would have denied everything. They would have played the part of the shocked, grieving parents, horrified to learn that their responsible, sensible daughter was leading a secret criminal life. They would have let us rot in jail to save themselves. I looked at Mark, who was still kneeling by the open bag, his face ashen. He wasn't looking at the drugs. He was looking at me, his eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful pity. He knew what this meant. He knew that it wasn't just a bag of drugs that had been opened on this deserted road. It was my heart. It was my past. It was every memory I had of the people who were supposed to love me more than anyone else in the world. And all that was left was the ugly, poisonous truth. The air in the quiet forest clearing was thick with the truth. It was a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. The neat row of plastic-wrapped bricks on the gravel was an indictment, a declaration of a betrayal so fundamental that my mind struggled to find a framework to place it in. Parents are supposed to be protectors. They are the origin story of your safety, the architects of your world. To discover that your architects had built a trapdoor under your feet, that they were willing to watch you fall for their own gain, was to realize that your entire foundation was a lie. Kneeling there, with the sharp stones digging into my legs, my mind began to violently reject the present by retreating into the past. It was a desperate, subconscious effort to find an error in the calculation, to find a memory that would contradict the horror laid out before me. But instead of comfort, my memories began to reconfigure themselves, shifting into a new, more sinister alignment. Seemingly innocent moments from my life suddenly took on a darker shade, each one a small piece of evidence in a case I never knew was being built against me. The scene from a few weeks ago in my kitchen played out in my head again, but this time in high definition, with a terrifying new clarity. I saw my mother's face, not as a worried parent, but as a skilled manipulator. Her initial plea for help, her voice trembling, her eyes welling with tears. It was a performance. She was testing the waters, gauging my willingness to be their savior. I saw my father's averted gaze, his slumped shoulders. I had interpreted it as shame for his financial failures. Now I saw it for what it was, the weak-willed cowardice of a man who was complicit in his wife's schemes. A man who would let her lead them into darkness because he was too afraid to stand up to her. And my refusal. My calm, logical, responsible refusal. I can't. We have the kids to think about. That sentence had sealed our fate. It wasn't a negotiation to them. It was a line drawn in the sand. I had chosen my family over them. I had prioritized my children's future over their past mistakes. In their warped view of the world, this was not a reasonable boundary. It was a profound act of defiance. It was a betrayal. And their response was to betray me back, in a way so disproportionate, so monstrous, it was almost biblical. My mother's parting shot, her voice dripping with acidic sweetness. Of course, you have your rules. You always have. She wasn't just being scornful. She was passing judgment. My rules, my careful planning, my responsible nature, these were not virtues to her. They were an inconvenience. My stability was a constant, unspoken rebuke to their chaos, and they resented me for it. They didn't admire my strength. They saw it as a resource to be exploited. And when I refused to let them tap that resource in the way they wanted, they found another way to use it. They would use my reputation, my clean record, my trustworthy, non-threatening family in a minivan persona as a cloak for their own criminality. My mind dug deeper, pulling up other memories, dusting them off and examining them in this new, harsh light. I remembered being 16 when my sister Chloe had crashed my dad's car. She had been drinking with her friends. It was a serious accident. She was lucky she hadn't hurt anyone. I remembered my parents' panicked reaction, but their panic wasn't for Chloe's safety. It was for her future. A DUI charge would ruin her chances of getting into a good college. So they created a story. They said a deer had run out in front of her. They coached her on what to say to the police. And they made me promise to back her up. "We can't let this ruin her life, Emily," my mother had whispered to me, her grip tight on my arm. "You're the sensible one. They'll believe you." And I had done it. I had lied for them. Because I was the good daughter. I was the fixer. I remembered when I was in college, working 2 jobs to pay my tuition. My parents had called me frantic. My father had made another bad investment and they were short on the mortgage payment. They needed a loan. I had emptied my savings account, the money I had painstakingly put away for a down payment on a car, and I had wired it to them without a second thought. They had promised to pay me back. They never did. When I gently brought it up a year later, my mother had acted offended. "Family doesn't keep score, Emily," she had said, a chill in her voice. But they did keep score. They knew exactly how much they could take from me. One memory after another surfaced, each one twisting the knife a little deeper. The times they had forgotten their wallets and I had paid for family dinners. The times Chloe needed help moving or painting her apartment, and I was the one who was expected to show up because my job as a nurse was seen as more flexible than her important career as a lawyer. I was always the one who was expected to sacrifice, to give, to be the bedrock of support. And I had done it willingly because I thought that's what love was. I thought that's what family did. I thought my role as the responsible one was a role of honor. Kneeling on the gravel, with my husband standing a silent vigil over the evidence of their depravity, I finally understood the truth. I was not the bedrock. I was the doormat. My responsibility was not a virtue they admired. It was a weakness they exploited. My love for them was not a cherished gift. It was leverage. They had never seen me as a daughter to be protected, but as a utility to be used. And the moment my utility ran out, the moment I refused to be their financial safety net, they had repurposed me. I became a tool for a much more dangerous job. I was their mule, their cover, their disposable, unsuspecting shield. The weight of this realization was crushing. It was a grief that went beyond the immediate terror of our situation. It was the death of my entire childhood, the execution of every good memory, the laughter around the Christmas tree, the summer vacations at the lake, the bedtime stories. It was all tainted now, all recast as part of a long, elaborate deception. Had they ever truly loved me? Or had I always been just a component in the machinery of their lives, valuable only for my function? I looked over at the minivan, at the silhouette of my children's heads visible through the tinted windows. They were the only thing that was real in this moment. My love for them, my husband's love for me, the little family we had created, that was my true foundation. My parents had tried to use that too. They had tried to use my children's innocent faces as a passport for their poison. The thought sent a surge of pure, white-hot rage through me, burning away the shock and the grief. This wasn't just about me anymore. They had endangered my children. They had put Leo, Maya, and Ben in the path of a bullet. They had wrapped their beautiful, innocent grandchildren in the flag of their own corruption and had marched them toward a jail cell. I slowly got to my feet, my body aching, my knees raw. I looked at Mark, and he saw the shift in my eyes. The fear was still there, but it was now overlaid with something harder, something colder. It was the steely resolve of a mother protecting her young. "Zip up the bag," I said, my voice low and steady, devoid of the tremor that had been there moments before. He looked at me, a question in his eyes. "Zip it up," I repeated. "We're not going to the reunion. We're not going home. We're taking it back to them. Right now." There would be no screaming match, no tearful confrontation. I was done with their drama, their manufactured crises. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I would simply return what was theirs. I would place their poison back on their doorstep, and then I would walk away. I wasn't just turning the car around. I was turning my back on the entire lie of my life. I was the good daughter, the responsible one. And my first and only responsibility now was to my own family. And protecting them meant cutting out the disease that had created them. The drive back was a journey through a vacuum. We had reversed our direction, but we had not gone back in time. The 4 hours we had just spent driving north, filled with the mundane chatter and predictable rhythms of our family life, felt like they belonged to a different century, to different people. The people in this minivan now were strangers. I was a stranger to myself. The woman who had meticulously packed snacks and chosen audiobooks for the kids was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out version of herself, an automaton gripping a steering wheel, her only function to put distance between her children and the source of their danger. The silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was a tangible presence in the car, thick and heavy, pressing in on us from all sides. It was composed of the things we couldn't say. Mark sat beside me, a statue of rigid support. He didn't try to fill the void with meaningless comforts or probing questions. He simply existed beside me, a silent partner in my grief and rage. He understood that this was a wound so deep that words would only irritate it. Occasionally, his hand would move on the center console, his fingers brushing against mine in a fleeting gesture of solidarity. It wasn't a gesture of pity, but of shared gravity. He was in this with me. He was the one who had seen the danger, and his quiet presence now was a promise that he would be the one to help me see a way out of it. In the back, the children were adrift on the sea of our tension. Their initial frightened questions had given way to a subdued, watchful quiet. They must have sensed the finality in my voice, the impenetrable wall that had gone up around me. Ben had fallen into a fitful sleep, his little body curled in his car seat, his face slack with a vulnerability that made my heart ache. Maya was staring out the window, her coloring book forgotten in her lap. Her reflection in the glass was a small, somber face, and I wondered what she was thinking, what stories she was telling herself to make sense of this bizarre, unnerving turn of events. Leo had put his headphones back on, but he wasn't watching his movie. His tablet screen was dark. The headphones were a shield, a way to retreat from the suffocating silence that he was old enough to understand was not peaceful, but perilous. My own mind was a relentless looping newsreel of the last hour. The image of those plastic-wrapped bricks on the gravel, the look on Mark's face, the cheerful, lying smiles of my parents. The thoughts came in sharp, painful bursts. They had risked my children's lives. They had smiled and hugged my son, all while knowing they were placing him in the center of a drug trafficking scheme. The sheer, calculated evil of it was staggering. It wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. It was a premeditated, cold-blooded decision. They had weighed our lives against their financial problems and found us wanting. And then the phone buzzed. It was sitting in the cup holder, and the vibration was violently loud in the silent car. The screen lit up, illuminating the small, dark space with a pale, artificial glow. The name on the screen was Mom. My heart seized. It was a physical jolt, like a small electric shock. For a split second, the old reflex kicked in, the lifelong conditioning to answer when my mother called. But it was followed by a wave of revulsion so powerful it made me nauseous. I let it buzz. The sound seemed to go on forever, an insistent, demanding summons from a world I no longer belonged to. It buzzed, and then it stopped, and the car was quiet again. I imagined her on the other end, standing at the resort, a fake smile plastered on her face as she talked to a cousin, her eyes darting around, looking for our minivan, her initial cheerfulness turning to a flicker of annoyance. Where are they? Emily is always so punctual. A minute later, it buzzed again. Dad. This time, the feeling was different. It was a hollow ache of disappointment. My father, the quiet enabler, the man who had stood by and let my mother's manipulative nature dictate their lives, and now, ours. He would be the one she sent to be the soft approach, the one who would call and sound worried, his voice gentle, trying to coax information out of me. I ignored his call too. The screen went dark. The silence that followed was even heavier than before. We had crossed a new threshold. I had actively rejected their attempt to reach me. It was a small act of defiance, but it felt monumental. It was the first time in my life I had consciously and deliberately ignored my parents. Mark glanced at me, his expression unreadable but supportive. He knew what that cost me. He knew the years of conditioning I was fighting against. He said nothing, but he didn't have to. Then came the text messages. A series of rapid-fire pings that were somehow more intrusive than the calls. Mom, honey, are you okay? Getting close? We're all waiting for you! Mom, traffic must be bad. Let me know when you cross the border. Xuxo Dad, give us a call. Your mother is starting to worry, the lies, the casual sickening lies. We're all waiting for you. They weren't waiting for us. They were waiting for their package. They were waiting for their payday. We were just the delivery service. The hypocrisy was so blatant, so shameless, that it stoked the cold fire of my rage. Then, a new caller. Chloe, my sister, the golden child. I stared at her name on the screen, What was her role in this? Did she know? Did she have any idea what our parents were capable of? Or was she just another one of their props? The perfect daughter they used to distract from their own sordid secrets. The call was likely prompted by my mother. Call your sister Chloe. She'll answer for you. Find out where she is. I couldn't bring myself to answer. I didn't have the energy to navigate her brand of polite, surface-level concern. I silenced the call and tossed the phone into the glove compartment, shutting the door on it. On all of them. The act of physically hiding the phone was liberating. I was severing the connection. I was taking back control. They could no longer reach me. The car became my sanctuary, a fortress on wheels, and with every mile we drove south, I felt the chains of my lifelong obligation to them beginning to rust and flake away. I was no longer their daughter, not in any way that mattered. My only identity, the only role I cared about, was the one I occupied right now, a mother, sitting beside her husband, her 3 children in the back, driving them all away from a poison that had been masquerading as love. The silence in the car was no longer just an absence of sound. It was the sound of my old life ending. The sun was lower in the sky when we finally exited the highway and began the drive toward my parents' house. The familiar landmarks that had once signaled a comforting return to my roots now felt like signposts in a foreign, hostile territory. The little diner where my dad used to take me for milkshakes, the park where I'd scraped my knee learning to ride a bike, the sprawling oak tree at the corner of their street. Each one was a ghost of a life that was no longer mine. The neighborhood was quiet, basking in the golden light of the late afternoon. Manicured lawns, freshly painted houses, SUVs parked in the driveways. It was a perfect portrait of suburban peace, a carefully constructed facade that hid the rot underneath. Just like my family, I didn't pull into their driveway. The thought of it, of the crunch of our tires on their gravel, felt like a violation of the new boundary I was trying to build. Instead, I parked 3 houses down the street, partially hidden by the shade of a large maple tree. I turned off the engine and the silence returned, but this time it was filled with a tense, purposeful energy. Okay, I said, my voice steady. Here's what we're going to do. You stay here with the kids. Keep the doors locked. I'm going to take the bag, leave it in their hallway and come right back. It will take less than 2 minutes. Mark turned to me, his face etched with concern. Emily, let me do it. You don't have to. Yes, I do, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. This is my family, my mess to clean up, or my mess to return anyway. I need to do this. He saw the resolve in my eyes and knew there was no point in trying to change my mind. He just nodded, his jaw tight. I'll keep the car running. If you're not back in 2 minutes, I'm coming to get you. I'll be back, I promised. I got out of the car, my movements feeling strangely slow and deliberate, as if I were moving through water. I walked to the back of the minivan and opened the trunk. The red duffel bag was still there, a splash of garish color amidst our muted luggage. It looked like a cancerous growth. I grabbed the nylon handles, the material feeling slick and cheap under my fingers. It was heavier than I expected, weighted down by my parents' greed and desperation. I slung the bag over my shoulder and started walking up the street toward their house. It was a walk I had made thousands of times in my life, but this time, every step was a conscious effort. I felt like a soldier walking into enemy territory, my senses on high alert. The street was empty. No cars passed. No neighbors were out watering their lawns. The world seemed to be holding its breath. Their house, the one I had grown up in, looked exactly the same. A neat 2-story colonial with pale blue siding and white trim. A wreath of fake flowers hung on the front door. It looked so wholesome, so completely and utterly normal. It was a lie. The whole thing was a lie. I didn't walk up the front path. I cut across the lawn, my feet sinking slightly into the soft, perfectly green grass. I went to the side of the house, to the small flower bed by the porch. There, tucked under the lip of the foundation, was a loose brick. I had discovered it when I was 10 years old, a perfect hiding place for my secret treasures. It was the same place my parents had always kept a spare key. I reached down, my fingers finding the familiar cold, rough texture of the brick. I pulled it out. The key was there, nestled in the damp earth. My hand was shaking as I picked it up. This key, a symbol of trust and belonging, now felt like a tool for a covert operation. I walked up the porch steps, my footsteps echoing in the quiet air. I slipped the key into the lock. It turned with a familiar, smooth click. I pushed the door open just wide enough to slip inside. The house was quiet. It smelled the way it always did, of my mother's potpourri and the faint, lingering scent of my father's coffee. The entryway was tidy, a pair of my dad's shoes sitting neatly by the door. I took the red duffel bag from my shoulder and placed it gently on the hardwood floor, right in the middle of the hallway where they couldn't possibly miss it. It sat there, a bright red beacon of their betrayal. I didn't look around. I didn't allow myself to feel a single pang of nostalgia. I was a stranger in this house now, an intruder. My only mission was to deliver a message. And the message was the bag itself. It said everything that needed to be said. I know it's over. Here is your poison. Keep it. I backed out of the doorway, pulling the door shut until it clicked. I used the key to lock it from the outside, the finality of the sound sealing the moment. I walked back to the flower bed, replaced the key in its hiding spot, and pushed the loose brick back into place. I was erasing my presence, leaving no trace that I had ever been there. Then I walked away. I didn't look back. I walked with steady, deliberate steps, back down the street to where my real family was waiting for me. I got into the driver's seat, closed the door, and buckled my seatbelt. Mark looked at me, his eyes searching my face. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft. "I am now," I said. And it was the truth. A strange sense of calm had washed over me. It wasn't happiness or relief, but a quiet, somber clarity. A chapter of my life had just ended. I had placed the period at the end of the sentence myself. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. As we turned the corner, leaving my childhood street behind, I felt the weight of the red duffel bag, a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying on my own shoulders, finally lift. It was their burden now. They could carry it themselves. The first call came less than an hour later. We were on the highway, heading back toward our own city, a silent agreement passing between me and Mark that we would not be going to our house tonight. The risk of my parents showing up there was too high. We would get a hotel, a sterile, anonymous room where we could feel safe and figure out our next move. My phone, which I had retrieved from the glove compartment and placed face down on the console, buzzed to life. It was my mother. This time I answered. I pressed the button to put the call on the car's speaker. A small, vindictive part of me wanted Mark to hear this, to be a witness. "Emily? Oh, thank God. Honey, where are you? We have been worried sick." Her voice was a masterpiece of manufactured concern, high-pitched and trembling with fake anxiety. I didn't play along. My voice, when it came out, was flat and cold, a stranger's voice. "We're fine." There was a brief pause. My tone had clearly thrown her off script. "Fine? What happened? Did you have car trouble? Why didn't you answer your phone? Your father and I were about to call the police." "We decided not to come to the reunion," I said, my words clipped and precise. "Not come? But why? Is one of the kids sick?" Her voice was a rapid-fire volley of questions, desperately searching for a plausible, innocent explanation. "No, the kids are fine," I said. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat before I delivered the blow. "We dropped off the bag at your house. If it was that important, maybe you should have taken it yourself." The silence on the other end of the line was instantaneous and profound. In that single moment of dead air, I heard everything. I heard the shock, the panic, the dawning horrified realization that her scheme had been discovered. The carefully constructed facade of the worried mother shattered, and when she spoke again, her voice was completely different. The warmth was gone, replaced by a sharp defensive edge. "What are you talking about? What bag?" she stammered, the lie clumsy and transparent. "Don't, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Just don't. It's over. I don't know what you think you know, Emily, but you are making a terrible mistake," she snapped, her panic turning to anger. "You have a responsibility to this family." The audacity of that statement, after what she had done, was breathtaking. "My only responsibility is to my children," I said, the words tasting like steel in my mouth. "Goodbye, Mom." I ended the call before she could respond. The car was silent for a moment, and then Mark let out a long, slow breath. "Wow," he whispered. "She didn't even try to apologize." "She's not sorry she did it," I said, staring at the road ahead. "She's just sorry she got caught." The real confrontation came 2 days later. We had been staying in a hotel, living out of suitcases, trying to create a bubble of normalcy for the kids with trips to the pool and movies on demand. I had been ignoring the constant barrage of calls and texts from my parents and my sister. On the third morning, there was a knock at our front door at home. Our neighbor, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, had agreed to keep an eye on our house. She called me, her voice flustered. "Emily, dear, your parents are here," she whispered into the phone. "They're on your front porch and they look very upset. They've been knocking for 10 minutes. My blood ran cold. They had tracked me down. Of course they had. They wouldn't let it go. They needed to control the narrative, to twist the story until they were the victims. "Do not let them in, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice firm. "Tell them you don't have a key. Tell them we're out of town and you don't know when we'll be back." There was another, more insistent knock. This time it was at our hotel room door. My heart leaped into my throat. How had they found us? Mark went to the peephole, his body tense. He looked for a long moment, then stepped back, his face grim. "It's them," he said quietly. "They must have called every hotel in the city." My mother's desperation knew no bounds. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked to the door. I opened it, but only a few inches, keeping the security latch engaged. They were standing in the hallway, looking frantic and disheveled. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, and my father looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Emily, let us in," my mother demanded, her voice a harsh whisper. "We need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the metal latch on the door. "Don't be ridiculous," she hissed, trying to push the door open. The latch held firm. "This is all a misunderstanding. You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "You put a kilo of cocaine in a bag and sent me to an international border with my 3 children in the car. Tell me, what would be the appropriate reaction to that?" My father flinched, but my mother's eyes narrowed. "It wasn't cocaine," she spat, as if the specific type of illegal substance made any difference. "And it was just a way to help with our debt. We were desperate. We didn't know what else to do, and there it was. The justification, the blame shifting. This was somehow my fault." "You're right, you were desperate," I said, my voice shaking with a cold, controlled rage. "But desperation doesn't give you the right to destroy my life. It doesn't give you the right to risk my children's future. We would never let anything happen to the children." My father finally spoke, his voice cracking. "We love them." "Love?" I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You don't know the first thing about love. You love yourselves. You love your money. You love the idea of family, as long as it serves you. But you don't love anyone enough to protect them from your own selfishness." My mother's face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation. "After everything we've done for you." "We gave you a perfect childhood. You gave me a role to play," I shot back. "And I'm done playing it. You need to leave. Now. You wouldn't help us," she said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, her last, most pathetic excuse. "This is what happens when you turn your back on family." "No," I said, looking her straight in the eye, channeling every ounce of strength I had left. "You didn't just betray me, you risked my children, and that is something I will never, ever forgive. We are done. Get away from this door. Get away from my family." I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing in the sterile hotel hallway. I leaned against it, my body trembling, my heart pounding. I could hear my mother start to sob on the other side, loud, dramatic sobs designed for an audience. But there was no audience here. There was just a closed door. And for the first time in my life, I was on the right side of it. Closing the door on them was not the end. I had been naive to think it would be that simple. For people like my parents, a closed door is not a boundary. It's a challenge. It's an obstacle to be overcome with more manipulation, more pressure, more guilt. They couldn't accept that they had lost control. Their desperation, which had led them to drug trafficking, now fueled a relentless campaign to reclaim their place in our lives, not out of love, but out of a need to repair their shattered self-image. Their next tactic was to bypass me entirely and go for the weakest link, my children. A few days after the hotel incident, a massive package arrived at our house. Our neighbor called to let me know. It was a giant, ridiculously expensive-looking dollhouse for Maya, the kind of extravagant gift my parents would never normally buy. It was addressed to her with a card that read, "We miss our little angel. Love, Grandma and Grandpa." It was a Trojan horse, a beautifully wrapped bribe designed to sneak past my defenses and plant their influence back inside my home. I told Mrs. Gable to leave it on the porch. When we finally returned home that evening, the giant box was sitting there, a monument to their refusal to accept reality. Mark carried it straight to the garage. We never even told Maya it had arrived. The idea of my daughter playing with a toy bought with drug money, a toy that was nothing more than a manipulative tool, made me feel physically ill. The next attempt was more brazen, more terrifying. I was picking Ben up from his preschool a week later. As I was buckling him into his car seat, I saw a familiar car pull up across the street. It was my father's Buick. He was sitting in the driver's seat and my mother was beside him. They were just watching. My blood ran cold. This was a violation of a sacred space. My child's school. It was a clear, unmistakable message. "We know where you are. We can get to you. You can't hide from us." I fumbled with Ben's seatbelt, my hands shaking so badly I could barely close the buckle. I threw myself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sped away. My eyes locked on the rearview mirror until their car was just a speck in the distance. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, Every car that passed on the street sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. They had brought their darkness to my doorstep, and now they were bringing it to my children's lives. They were leaving me no choice. I found Mark in the living room staring into the dark. He knew something was wrong. They were at Ben's school, I said, my voice a broken whisper. He didn't need any more explanation. He stood up and came to me, wrapping his arms around me. I leaned into him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "This has to stop," I said, my voice muffled against his chest. "They're not going to stop. They will keep pushing until they break us or something terrible happens." He held me for a long moment, and then he pulled back, his hands on my shoulders, his expression serious and resolved. "I know," he said. "So what do we do?" I looked around our home, the place we had filled with our children's laughter, our shared dreams. I thought of the life we had built here, our friends, our jobs, our community, and I knew, with a certainty that felt like a physical weight in my stomach, that we had to leave it all behind. "We have to leave," I said, the words feeling like a betrayal of the life we loved, but a necessary act of survival, far away. A place where they can't find us. A place where the kids can be safe, where I don't have to look over my shoulder every second of the day. They'll never stop. Not as long as we're within their reach. It was the hardest decision of my life, but it was also the easiest. When the choice is between your home and your children's safety, there is no choice. Mark didn't hesitate. He simply nodded. "Okay," he said. "Okay, we'll leave." The weeks that followed were a blur of calculated chaos. We didn't tell anyone the real reason we were leaving. We crafted a plausible story about a job opportunity for Mark in another state, a chance we couldn't pass up. It was a lie that tasted like ash, especially when we told our friends. When we saw the disappointment in our children's faces at the news they would have to leave their school and their friends behind. We told them it was a new adventure, and to their credit, they tried to be brave. We sold the house in a rush, taking the first decent offer. We packed our lives into boxes, a sad, frantic triage of what was essential and what had to be left behind. With every object I wrapped in paper, I felt like I was packing away a piece of myself. The rocking chair where I had nursed all 3 of my babies. The height chart we had marked on the kitchen doorframe. It was a painful, brutal amputation. We were cutting ourselves off from our past, from our support system, from everything we had ever known, all because the 2 people who were supposed to be our ultimate safety net had become the biggest threat we faced. We moved across the country, to a small town in Colorado where we knew no one. We got a new phone number. We scrubbed our presence from social media. We effectively disappeared. The first few months were painfully lonely, but they were also peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had become my background noise for weeks finally faded away. About 6 months after we moved, I got a call from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She had gotten my new number from a friend of a friend. Her voice was hesitant, full of awkward sympathy. "Emily, I don't know if you've heard," she said, "but it's about your parents." My heart stopped. "What about them?" "They were arrested," she said, the words rushing out. "At the border. The Canadian border? They tried to drive across themselves. They found something in their car." I closed my eyes. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a profound, bottomless sadness. It was the pathetic, inevitable end to their story. They had run out of people to use, their supply of shields and mules exhausted. In the end, they had no one to hide behind but themselves. And it hadn't been enough. I used to think being the good daughter meant being a savior. It meant showing up, cleaning up messes, and absorbing the shocks so that everyone else could keep moving forward. My worth was tied to my utility. But the day I turned that car around, the day I chose to trust the terror in my husband's eyes over a lifetime of familial obligation, I finally learned what it really means to save someone. I saved my children from a fate they would have never understood. I saved my husband from a prison he didn't deserve. And in the end, I finally saved myself. We built a new life, brick by painful brick, in a town where no one knew our story. We are no longer defined by the family we left behind. We are defined by the family we are, right here, right now. The peace we have is a quiet, fragile thing, but it's real, and we earned it. Sometimes survival doesn't look like a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like a U-turn on a busy highway. And sometimes it looks like walking away and never ever looking back. What about you? Have you ever had to cut ties with the very people who raised you, not out of anger, but for your own survival? Drop your story in the comments. Your voice matters. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because you are not alone.